To do is just kind of go over what we are going to talk about today. Okay, so in speaking about food safety, we're going to talk about what is a foodborne illness. That sounds pretty serious, and it can be. It can go from mild to really serious. So we'll talk about what a foodborne illness is, the four core practices, who exactly is at risk. I'm sure you've all heard the phrase cross-contamination, so we're going to talk about what is cross-contamination, the greatest threat to food safety today, conditions that encourage growth, what we call TDZ, otherwise known as the temperature danger zone, how to handle food safely, critical consumer control points, some food safety myths. As usual, there's an app for that, so we'll talk about a very timely app and some help along the way so that you can stay safe with your food and enjoy cooking and eating without fear of getting sick. Okay. All right, so first thing, let's talk about what is a foodborne illness. So a foodborne illness is a disease that is transmitted to humans by food. All right, these can be classified as moist, high protein, and or low acid foods that include things like milk or milk products, so your dairy, eggs, meats, poultry, fish and shellfish, baked and broiled potatoes, tofu and other soy protein products, alfalfa or bean sprouts, and cut melons, leafy greens, and tomatoes. All right, so we're going to start with the first core practice here, which is clean. All right, so when we talk about clean, we're talking about things like washing hands with warm water and soap for at least 20 seconds before and after handling food, and things like using the bathroom, changing diapers, handling pets. Some of these, and the reason I'm saying that and felt the need to kind of put specifics isn't because I think, like you all can't figure that out. But sometimes when we get wrapped up in stuff, we just kind of forget and we just go from one task to another, doing one thing to another, and we just kind of forget. So this is just a way for me to remind you to remind yourself, hey, when I'm working with food, I got to make sure if I touch something else in general, other than food, I want to wash my hands, all right? Wash your cutting boards, dishes, utensils, and countertops with hot soapy water after preparing each food item and before you go on to the next food item. So definitely when we're talking about raw foods versus cooked foods, we don't want to mix those two. We want to make sure we wash our hands in between preparing or touching those. Also, consider using paper towels to clean up kitchen surfaces. So if you use a cloth towel, for instance, just wash them often in the hot cycle of your washing machine because those just keep the debris and the bacteria. You wipe the counter, then you wipe a dish, you wipe the counter again, or, it's got grease in it. So you're just constantly spreading that from one surface to another. Paper towels, you're just kind of one and done. So something else to keep in mind. Rinse fresh fruits and vegetables under running tap water, including those with skins and rinds that are not eaten. Does anybody know the reason why? So like, for instance, if you were to use a melon, why you'd want to wash the outside before you cut it? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Well, the reason is this: chemicals. Yeah, it's really about, you got it right, Dana. It's really about chemicals. Where is food grown? It's where melons grown. They're grown in soil, dirt. They're on the ground. And so forget about, I'm not talking about pesticides. I'm just talking about nature, right? We have animals out there. Animals produce feces, whether they are animals that graze on the ground or those that fly above us, right? So you just don't know what's on the ground, but clearly there's a lot of germs, bacteria, and you want to make sure that that doesn't transfer to your food. So obviously the rind is what's touching and being exposed to all that. So best thing is to wash it and make sure you dry it well so that when you cut into it, you're not taking what's on the surface of the rind and putting it right into the center of the core, all right? Rub firm-skinned fruits and vegetables under running water or scrub them with a clean vegetable brush while rinsing with tap water. Again, that's to get off the bacteria. All right. So the second section is separate. That's the second core practice. So in separating, you want to think about cross-contamination and how bacteria can spread. So improper handling of raw meat, poultry, seafood, and eggs can create an inviting environment for cross-contamination. All right. As a result, harmful bacteria can spread to food and throughout the kitchen. Use one cutting board for fresh produce and a separate one for raw meat, poultry, and seafood. Very important that your surfaces stay clean and separated throughout. If there is one, let's say that you are slicing bread on, or using for dry foods like that, or crackers, you want to have a separate cutting board for the rolls and the bread and things like that, and a separate one for vegetables, a separate one for raw meats and fish. Never place cooked food on a plate that previously held raw meat, poultry, seafood, or eggs. Again, cross-contamination. Okay, let's talk a little bit about cooking. So food is safely cooked when it reaches a high enough internal temperature to kill the harmful bacteria that causes foodborne illness. A food thermometer is used to measure the internal temperature of cooked foods. I would recommend everybody have at least one thermometer, one food thermometer in the kitchen, if possible, too, because sometimes over time, they're not calibrated, and if you can't calibrate it or you forget, you're going to end up using a thermometer that is just not giving you the right internal temperature, which can end up causing problems somewhere down the road. They're inexpensive enough. They're just a few bucks. You don't have to get a fancy digital one, but it's a good idea to have one. And a simple way that you can test it just to see if it's on the mark is to boil some water and put the thermometer in the boiling water, and don't let it touch the bottom of the pan, and make sure that it reaches the temperature, which I think is 212 degrees. And you can also put it in ice water, and that would be sticking it in and seeing that it goes to 32. Okay, so just a simple way to check on the calibration. If those numbers aren't right, then you definitely want to get a different thermometer. All right. You want to cook roast and steaks to a minimum of 145 degrees Fahrenheit. All poultry should remain a safe minimum internal temperature of 165 degrees as measured with the food thermometer. Check in the innermost part of the thigh and the thickest part of the breast. Right? So the thickest part of the meat is where you want to put it, but don't let it touch the bottom of the pan, because then you're just measuring the heat of the pan. So something else to keep in mind. Cook ground meat to at least 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Remember, color is not a reliable indicator of doneness. Right? You have to use the thermometer. Cook eggs until the yolk and white are firm and not runny. Cook fish to 145 degrees Fahrenheit until the flesh is opaque and separates easily with a fork. Make sure there are no cold spots in food when using a microwave. So you all know that when you're cooking in a microwave, it cooks from the inside out, right? So that's why it's important that it rotate, or if your microwave doesn't have something to rotate it on, that you take it out, turn it, and make sure that it stays rotated and stir it. You want to distribute that heat. Otherwise, it's just going to stay in one place. And you're going to be eating something that's super hot against another spot that's super cold. Okay? And lastly, bring sauces, soups, and gravies to a rolling boil when you're reheating them. And heat other leftovers thoroughly to 165 degrees. Now, also, I just want to mention, I have 3 handouts that I've set up for you guys, and there is a supplemental sheet on safe cooking guidelines that's included. So all of this is in a slightly different format that I think is easier to read and would probably be just a great resource to keep in a notebook if you have recipes in there, or a cookbook, or just post up on your fridge. Okay. The next one I want to talk to you about is chilling. That's the third core practice. So refrigerate foods quickly because cold temps slow the growth of human bacteria, of harmful bacteria. It does not stop it. And I want to be clear about that. And we'll talk a little bit more in a few minutes about that. But refrigerating and freezing does not kill bacteria. Okay, don't overstuff the fridge. Cold air must circulate to keep food safe. Keep a constant refrigerator temp of 40 degrees or below, and that's just one of the most effective ways to reduce the risk of foodborne illness, is making sure you're keeping foods to temp. You can easily go to Target or Walmart or someplace like that, and you can pick up a refrigerator thermometer, all right? And it can just either attach to the refrigerator wall or it can hang, all right? But always a good idea. Um, Refrigerator fruit or freeze meat, poultry, eggs, and other perishables as soon as you get them home. You don't want them to be sitting out for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour. You want to get them in and chilling or frozen as soon as possible. Never let raw meat, poultry, eggs, cooked food, or cut fresh fruits or vegetables sit at room temperature for more than 2 hours before putting them in the fridge or freezer. Again, there's a specific reason for that, and that's because that's when bacteria will start to grow at a very rapid rate once you hit that 2 hour mark. Okay? And you don't see bacteria, you don't taste bacteria, but you almost definitely feel it. All right. Never defrost food at room temperature. Food has to be kept at a safe temperature during thawing. There are 3 safe ways, and I really want for y'all to be mindful of this. There are 3 safe ways to defrost food: in the fridge, in cold water, and in the microwave. All right, food thawed in cold water in the microwave should be cooked immediately. So I'm sure everybody could probably share a story or two about growing up and when mom was making dinner and she had a solid block of meat, what did she do with it to defrost it? Put it out on the counter, right? I can remember many times myself seeing that. So we don't want to do that though. Overall, it'll take way longer and actually defrost much quicker in water, or certainly the microwave if possible. But keep in mind, does anybody know, before I share this with you, so quick quiz, anybody know why I'm saying that if you are to defrost something in the microwave, you need to cook it right after that? Anybody have any thoughts on that? You've raised the temp. Well, yes. How do we raise the temp? By doing what to it? Fine. Well, you're kind of cooking it, right? I mean, think about it. A microwave cooks things. It cooks it from the inside out. So you're right, Dana. If we are in effect thawing it, we're thawing it by cooking it from the inside out. So although it may be thawed on the outside, it's already fully cooked on the inside. So you cannot, once you let that out of the bag, you got to let it go. So you have to cook it fully, and then you can decide what you want to do with it afterwards. But once you defrost in a microwave, you have to move forward with cooking it. Okay. Same thing in cold water. It now has a very limited shelf life once it's defrosted. You need to cook it. All right. Always marinate foods in the refrigerator. Divide large amounts of leftovers into shallow containers for quicker cooling. And use or discard refrigerated food on a regular basis. So just a note, although I'm sure you all know this already, food does not last forever just because it's refrigerated. Everything has a shelf life, and it's the same thing with the freezer. How long can you keep leftovers? I'm going to, it depends on what it is, but in general, it's no more than, I think it's 2 or 3 days, 1 to 2 days, excuse me, 1 to 2 days, Dana. Now, I want you to look at, again, I'm going to refer you back to the handouts that I left for you, because There's some safe cooking guidelines. I did one for food safety and chill sheets. So I'm looking through. There is one of the handouts says chill, and it gives storage times for refrigerator and freezer. And actually, I'm looking at it now, and it says leftovers in the refrigerator are 3 to 4 days. My bad, 3 to 4 days. If you leave it in the freezer, depending on what it is, it could be anywhere from 1 to 6 months. Okay, so please take a look at that sheet. It's a great reference. And I think you'll have all the information based on the food, what the refrigeration, the max refrigeration and freezer time is on that. So Mildred, I'm reading what you're saying, the best by date. If it has been kept and stored correctly, how safe is it to use after the best by date? That's a really good question. So here's the thing about that. That best by date is really more for the store than it is for us. So the stores legally can only have food on the shelf for so long that they can sell before they're required through federal guidelines of not being able to sell it past that point. That by no means means that it is unsafe to eat. It just means it can't be sold past that time. So in general, and depending on the product, it is still certainly safe to eat. So if you buy something the day before the sell-by date is, you still have, and it's not a damaged container and hasn't been compromised in any way, shape, or form. You still have, again, depending on what it is, several days, to use it with it. All right, assuming it's a perishable product. All right, so yeah, that doesn't mean that you can't eat it and it's not safe. Absolutely not. All right, I just want to. Anybody, before I move on to who's at risk, any questions on that? Because there was a lot of information in there, but I think that having the handouts is probably going to help everybody with just kind of clarifying specifically with what foods, and also knowing, for example, on the handout that gives storage times for refrigerator and freezer, I don't know how many people knew that luncheon meats, which many of us use as a quick, easy go-to for a meal or even a snack, right? You can actually freeze the deli meat and it'll hold up for 1 to 2 months if it's been either open or unopened, but just wrapped really well. So kind of interesting. So I definitely recommend you all take a look at these sheets and print them out and just keep them as a reference point for you. Dana, you have another? I'll wait for you before we go on. How is best to freeze meats to avoid freezer burn? Well, that's a good question because what causes freezer burn really is oxygen, right? So that's why plastic wrap is not always just the singular best option. So if you have those machines that can suck the air out, all right, that's the first best option because you're pulling all the oxygen out. So that will keep freezer burn at bay because you're limiting the exposure. The other thing that you can do is you can wrap it really well and tight in plastic wrap. Maybe put a little tape around it so it doesn't loosen up, and then put it in one of the heavy-duty freezer bags. And again, squeezing as much air as you can out of that, and then just wrapping it tightly and labeling and dating everything. It is not as foolproof as using one of those vacuum sealer machines, that has a pump that really sucks the air out. But that would be the next best thing. Just getting a couple of really tight layers on there, and that plastic, although it's porous in the bag, the freezer bags is still pretty good and thick at keeping the oxygen, the amount of oxygen at bay. All right, but moisture. Oxygen and the moisture is what causes freezer burn. So wrapping it really well and really tight and then putting it in that extra layer of protection in those freezer bags, which are thicker, I think will help you. All right, so let's talk a little bit about who's at risk. Well, infants, young children, pregnant women, older adults, and people who are chronically ill all have an increased risk of developing a foodborne illness, primarily because they just have a weaker immune system. Right? So infants and children, their stomachs produce less acid, making it easier for bacteria and viruses to multiply. Pregnant women, because a fetus does not have a fully developed immune system. And older adults, many times because of inadequate nutrition, a lack of protein in their diets, or poor blood circulation. Let's talk a little bit about cross-contamination. Cross-contamination is the transportation of harmful substances to the food by, number one, your hands. They touch raw food, such as chicken, and then they'll touch something that doesn't have to be cooked, like salad ingredients. Okay? Surfaces like cutting boards or cleaning cloths. They touch raw foods, they're not cleaned and sanitized, then they go to touch ready-to-eat foods. Then you've got raw or contaminated foods that touch or drip fluids onto cooked or ready-to-eat foods. And then utensils, such as knives, which cut raw foods like chicken and then cut things like lettuce that we're not going to cook, which is not a good idea. So it's good to have multiple knives and other utensils that you're going to have to use and keep separate. You don't have to have specific, but just have two of certain things like knives. So then you don't have to worry about constantly, did I wash it? I have to wash it. I have to do, just have two. So you always have a go-to item. All right, let's talk about some of the greatest threats to food safety. Number one, we've talked about this already, bacteria. So bacteria are the greatest threat. There's these single-celled living organisms that can grow quickly at very favorable temperatures. Right? Some are useful. We can use them to make things like cheese and yogurt and buttermilk and sauerkraut, pickles. Others are infectious disease-causing agents that are called pathogens that use the nutrients found in potentially hazardous foods to multiply. Some bacteria are non-infectious on their own, but they will multiply in a potentially hazardous food. They eject toxins that poison the human when that food is eaten. So a couple of quick facts. I don't want to go too deeply into that. If you touch a food during preparation, you may end up transferring several thousand bacteria to its surface. We have bacteria in our skin, but that's natural. We're supposed to have that, right? Quick fact number two, under the right conditions, that bacteria will double every 10 to 30 minutes. So a single bacterium will double with each division, so a single cell can become billions in 10 to 12 hours. And again, you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, but it's there. So following these kinds of tips and strategies is going to help keep you safe. All right, let's talk about some conditions that end up encouraging growth. So bacteria does best in warm, moist, protein-rich environments. That is what we call either pH neutral or low acid. Now, there's always exceptions to the rule. So some can thrive in extreme hot or cold, highly acidic, or extremely salty conditions. But bacteria grow fastest in the temperature range between 41 degrees and 135 degrees Fahrenheit, which is known as the temperature danger zone, or TDZ. That's why having a thermometer is going to help keep you all safe when you're cooking. All right, so let's talk how to handle food safely. So the most important tool you have is good personal hygiene. This is the way we maintain our health, appearance, and cleanliness. Not only can you be the victim of illness, but you can also end up being the carrier. A cough or sneeze can transmit thousands of microorganisms that may cause disease. So the first thing, wash hands often. Apply soap generously, scrub under your nails with a clean nail brush, rub your hands and wrists vigorously for at least 15 seconds, rinse thoroughly with warm water, and dry using a blow dryer or a single-use towel. Okay. First thing I want to do is I want to talk about these critical consumer control points in the store, and then we're going to move to the home. All right, you can see how things, as it's moving through the process from farm to store to table, where these control points are that can be hazardous if we're not careful. So when we're talking about being in a store, purchasing, you want to purchase the meat, poultry, and dairy products last. Okay? Keep packages of raw meat and poultry separate from other foods, especially produce. Important to use a bag. Use plastic bags to, I know we're all trying to be mindful about making less waste in plastic, but when it comes to putting the raw meats in, they wrap it in plastic, but how many times have you picked up a package of raw meat or chicken and it's leaked through and you've got that juice and blood on your hands, right? And now you have to worry about touching other stuff, or better yet, just getting your hands clean so you can go about the rest of your shopping. Use plastic bags to enclose individual packages of raw meat and poultry. Grab a few extra while in the produce section and put these on the bottom of the cart. Just in case things shift, right? Safety first. Make sure meat, poultry, and dairy products are refrigerated as soon as possible after purchase. The store should be your last errand when you are out doing your errands for the day or the week. Place refrigerated foods in a cooler, especially in hot weather for the trip home. I personally used to do, I didn't have a cooler, but I did have refrigerator bags, and I'd have some ice packs that I would keep, because when it's 100 degrees in your trunk, it doesn't take long before the temperature starts to change, and it's not a matter if you've been shopping for 3 hours. So it's always good just to have stuff like that, especially in extreme weather conditions. Okay. Purchase canned goods that are free of dents, cracks, or bulging lids. Take a look at what you purchase. Don't just grab it off the shelf. Check that all food packages are intact. There's no broken seams or tears. Select produce that is fresh. Watch for signs of aging and decay, such as mold or brown leaves and stems, and look for glossy skin and green leaves. Also, if you're buying things like berries or grapes, turn the package over and look at the bottom. A lot of times that's where the mold is. There's mushy berries, so always turn that stuff over. Select food packages with the longest period of time until expiration. It just gives you a little more wiggle room. It doesn't mean that it's going to change the safety of the food, but it just gives you more wiggle room. If using reusable bags, regularly wash them on a gentle cycle or wash them out. I used to take Lysol wipes and I would clean them out. Avoid storing reusable bags in the car or truck in warm weather, because high temperatures promote growth of harmful bacteria. But again, if you are cleaning them, so if they're cloth bags, obviously you can't use the Lysol wipes, but mine had a cleanable surface on the inside that I could. Otherwise, I would throw them in the wash with my laundry every few uses. Okay. Now, let's talk about some of these critical consumer control points once we get home with the food. So storing. Wash your hands as soon as you get home. This is a habit that I have started years ago. You've touched a lot of things. You don't know what other people have touched and how many other people have touched the carts and even your own food on the, as they're checking out. You don't know. So it's just a good idea in general. Wash your hands when you get home so you're starting clean. Refrigerate or freeze meats, fish, and poultry immediately. Freezers should be at 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Refrigerate dairy products immediately. Refrigerator temperature should be below 41 degrees. And again, if you have a thermometer in there, you'll always know where you stand. All right. Use a thermometer to assure correct temps and regularly check your temps. Store meat, fish, and poultry in plastic bags or on a plate and place on the lowest shelf of the refrigerator to prevent raw juices from dripping onto other foods. Again, safety first. Wash your hands with soap and water for 15 seconds before and after handling raw meat, poultry, or seafood products. Store your canned goods in a cool, dry place. Most of you have pantries or your other cabinets where you don't have dishes. And put recent purchases in back of your older items. This practice is called FIFO, first in, first out. It's just a matter of rotating so that you're using the oldest product first. All right. And store fresh produce appropriately. Most should be refrigerated and not washed until it's time to use. Washing it with running water is absolutely sufficient. You don't have to, scrub it with soap or special vegetable soaps. Cold water is fine. All right. When we talk about preparing food at home, proper hand washing, again, we can't say it enough. Very important. You also want to make sure, in addition to your hands, that you're washing the counters, equipment, utensils, and cutting boards with soap and water, hot water, immediately after use. You want to thaw your raw foods in the refrigerator and never at room temp. We've already talked about that. Wash and rinse cutting boards and knives between uses, and you want to wash again with hot soapy water. Air dry items, because dish towels, again, it just holds on to all that bacteria, which can be transferred to your food or to your utensils, which get transferred to the food. And do not use cutting boards with cracks or crevices, as these provide a place for bacteria to grow. When you cook your food, cook the food to the recommended temperature and use that thermometer to determine if you've reached that safe internal temp. Avoid interrupted cooking. It is risky to partially cook products and then go back and finish them later by grilling them, as this involves multiple trips through what we call the temperature danger zone. You're increasing the temperature, you're dropping the temperature of the food, you're increasing it again. That's just never good, all right? And you're kind of playing with fire there. Use microwave-safe containers when microwaving foods. Plastic is used to cover the containers, and they should be microwave safe, okay? Because sometimes, when you're cooking something, only for like even as little as 20 seconds, and all of a sudden you hear that popping, and you look inside, and whatever it is, there's particles of it on the walls and the top of the ceiling of the inside of the microwave. So always good to put a little cover on it, and something preferably that's, it says it's microwave safe. Be sure to rotate or store foods from the microwave. The microwave, we know, does not evenly distribute the heat. It has to be stirred. It needs to be rotated. Check the thickest part or the center of foods with the thermometer to be sure that those internal temperatures are reached. Thermometers need to be calibrated, not weekly. I don't think anybody's doing that much cooking, but on a regular basis, every few months, I would just check. And like I said, you can check it by putting it in, boil some water, put it in boiling water, and check that it comes up to 212 degrees. Again, put it in ice water. We have a couple of cubes in there, or the cubes have melted, so it's at temp, and then 32 degrees, all right? And then it's still calibrated and working appropriately. Thermometers, sorry, there was something else there. When you serve the foods, hot foods hot, cold foods cold. I know that sounds really simple, but sometimes when we are racing to get things done, we're trying to bang out multiple recipes. Sometimes we're just like, oh, yeah, it's hot enough, it's hot enough. It's not hot enough. If you don't cook it or reheat it to temperature, you may end up having a problem. So hot food's hot, cold food's cold. And you please refer to those handouts that I left for you so that you can see what the proper cooking temp is or reheating temps are. Wash your hands again before serving and eating food. Don't leave potentially hazardous foods, raw or cooked, at room temperature longer than necessary, and never longer than 2 hours. That is when the bacteria start to multiply at a rate that is out of control, all right? And will for sure cause some kind of illness. Keep hot foods above 135 degrees Fahrenheit and cold foods below 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Use designated utensils for each item. So that just goes back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, where if you're using like serving forks or something or knives, have two of each so that you don't have to worry about thinking about cross contamination. Oop, what did I touch with that, or did I wash that already? And keep batches of food items separate, again, to alleviate the concern for cross contamination. All right, leftovers. If in doubt, throw it out. Divide hot leftovers into small units and store in shallow containers for quick cooking. Bacteria can grow rapidly during the cooling process. So if you make a big batch of something like soup or stock or sauce, you want it to cool down as quickly as possible. And if you put it in a big stock pot and then kind of say, oh, well, I'll leave that out for an hour and then I'll put it in the refrigerator, that is still not going to work and it's not very safe. The best way to do that is to break it down into smaller containers. It cools much faster. Okay, refrigerate those items immediately after service. After you've used them, you're done with your meal or you're done prepping it. Reheat leftovers to 165 degrees Fahrenheit. Bring soups, sauces, and gravies to a rolling boil. Then you know you've reached that 165 degrees. When properly refrigerated below 41 degrees, you don't want to keep the item for more than 4 days. But again, please refer to one of those handouts I gave you that shows what the storage period is for leftover items, depending on what it is. All right. This is something else that I want you to give some thought to. It's an acronym called FAT-TOM. FAT-TOM explains what allows foodborne illness to grow. This is what you need in order to have foodborne illness. Food, acidity, time, temperature, oxygen, and moisture. And we're going to go quickly through each one of these so that you understand the role that each one of those plays. So food, moist, protein-rich milk, eggs, meat, fish, those are all potentially hazardous foods. Additionally, plant foods such as cooked potatoes, beans, raw seeds, sprouts, cut melons, cut leafy greens, and cut tomatoes are also potentially hazardous foods, meaning that they are most likely to cause foodborne illness because they are a food source for disease-causing bacteria. Okay? Acidity. The degree of acidity or alkalinity of a substance is measured by pH. So the pH is measured on a scale of 0 to 14.0. An environment of 7.0 is neutral. Lower than that is acidic. Higher than that is what we call alkaline. Bacteria grows best in an environment that is neutral or slightly acidic. Most bacterial growth is inhibited in very acidic conditions. That's why highly acidic foods like vinegar and citrus fruits seldom contain bacteria. And then I just wanted to give this to you guys as reference so you'd understand, if you're looking at like a lemon, we see that that's 2.4. So if you look at where you are on something that's acidic, neutral, and then very alkaline, or non-acidic, a lemon is 2.4, which you can see is still in the acidic range. All right, and then you can go all the way up to things like baking soda, which is very close to normal on the scale. All right, and then things like mayonnaise and whatever. So I just wanted you to just kind of have this reference point of understanding pH levels, where it falls on the scale, and what that means as far as just being aware of those foods that you have to be more mindful with regard to using, storage, and consumption. All right, finishing up with the FAT-TOM, we're coming to time, otherwise known as the 2-hour rule. So microorganisms reproduce by cell division. So 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, and so on. When foods are placed in that temperature danger zone, 41 to 135 degrees Fahrenheit, for more than 2 hours, Those microorganisms will multiply at such high levels in the food that eating that food is going to make you ill pretty quickly. Um, Now, we go back to temperature for a second. We already said that foods that are left in that TDZ for more than 2 hours will grow at an incredibly rapid rate. So it's important to note here, limit the time that foods are exposed to that temperature danger zone. Keep foods refrigerated below 41 degrees Fahrenheit until it's time to cook them. All right? And then cool leftover foods quickly, meaning those that are over 135 degrees Fahrenheit to 70 degrees or lower within 2 hours, and then cool it down to that 41 degree mark or lower within an additional 4 hours. So at max, something that you have cooking at a rolling boil, you just made gravy, you don't want to take more than 6 hours total for it to cool. All right, and then again, the way that we said we can do that is by then taking that after you've cooked it and breaking it into smaller containers and getting it um, cooled in the refrigerator as soon as possible to start that process. All right, if we're speaking about oxygen, microorganisms, they need oxygen or air to grow. So when foods are canned, the oxygen is excluded from the environment and the food is preserved and becomes what we call shelf stable. And it only requires refrigeration after we open it. Moisture, on the other hand, is also needed to grow. Moisture in the form of water. The perishability of a food is directly related to its moisture content. So foods with a high water content include things like meat and produce and soft cheeses. Now, foods preserved with salt or sugar, like jerky, jams, and jellies, they have a lower water activity because both the salt and the sugar inhibit that growth and because they have nothing to feed on. So these products are shelf stable. And they include items like dry noodles, flours, candies, and crackers. And one thing I just want to say about the whole oxygen thing, and why I mentioned it already, that we need to be careful when you're buying canned products and making sure that it's not, damaged. But especially if you have a bulging lid. So a bulging lid generally means not only is oxygen and bacteria gotten in there, but it probably contains botulism. All right. So anytime you see a canned item with a bulging lid, please throw it out. I see Mildred has a question. So before we move forward on another slide, I just want to wait to see that come up. Sometimes you get bottles of sauces that don't note whether to refrigerate after opening. What is the best course? Refrigerate. Well, no. I mean, you don't have to. I don't know. I'd like to know specifically if you can think of anything, what it is. But no, there are certain items that don't. And again, that's going to be based on the water activity. But if you can think of that, if you can think of it, type it. I'm curious what that is, but I mean, there are some. I can't think of any off the top of my head right now. But no, if it doesn't have that note on it, I wouldn't worry about it. It's okay. You'll be safe. Hot sauce. Oh, okay. Well, hot sauce, probably the reason why is there's got to be acid in there. If you think about hot sauce. So if there's acid, remember the acidity of a product that's going to kill the water activity. So the acid will take care of the bacteria and it won't allow it to grow. All right. I just see a question. Some of the Walden products don't, and I know the syrup doesn't. Well, here's the thing. It's interesting you use the word syrup, Mildred. So syrup is made with sugar. And so we were just talking about how things like jams and jellies. Salt and sugar act as preservatives and they inhibit the growth of bacteria. So that's probably why, if it has some kind of sugar in it, that it doesn't necessarily need to be refrigerated. So just something to think about, but probably good to take a look at the actual ingredient list. But thank you both. Those were good comments and questions. What I want to do now is move on to some food myths, all right, that are out there. I think a lot of people have. So one of them is cross-contamination doesn't happen in the refrigerator. It's too cold for there to be germs in there to survive. So I think at this point, everybody realizes that makes no sense, right? The fact is some bacteria can survive and even grow in the cool, moist environments like the refrigerator. And actually, a recent study revealed that one of the germiest places in the kitchen is in the refrigerator produce compartment, all right, containing things like salmonella and listeria. So keeping fruits and vegetables separate, number one, from raw meat and poultry and seafood is key. And the second is to clean it regularly using hot soapy, water and or Lysol wipes for anything that doesn't necessarily come out. I'd scrub a little with that, but that's really important to keep that in mind, right? I mean, over time, sometimes fruits and vegetables, they get a little funky, especially if you forget they were in there, and then they get brown, and sometimes they start to liquefy a little. You need to clean all that out. That's bacteria. Another food myth is, I don't need to rinse this melon for safety because the part I eat is on the inside. Well, again, we talked about that, right? But the outside part is the one that's touching the dirt and the soil and everything that's in there. And we want to make sure it stays on the outside and doesn't get on the inside. The best way to do that is to wash the outside. So playing it safe and rinsing your melon under running tap water while rubbing by hand or scrubbing with a brush and drying with a paper towel will help you do that. A knife or peeler passing through the rind can carry those pathogens from the outside into the flesh of the melon, and that's what causes you to get sick. So you do need to rinse it. We need to just think twice before we act on that, because as quickly as we cut it, we get sick. I eat a vegetarian diet, so I don't have to worry about food poisoning. Well, that's kind of an interesting one. Well, you eat a lot of produce on a vegetarian diet, so you want to always remember to rinse that produce under running tap water and never use detergent or bleach to wash the produce, as these are not intended for consumption. And even though you may be rinsing it right after that and hand drying it, some of that is bound to get not only exposed but absorbed by the produce. So you really don't want to have a problem. Packaged fruits and vegetables labeled ready to eat or washed do not need to be rewashed. Okay. Another myth, leftovers are safe to eat until they smell bad. Well, smell is not an indication of whether a food is safe to eat. The types of bacteria that cause foodborne illness do not affect the taste, the smell, or the appearance of food. We've talked about this already. You don't necessarily know whether something is bad just by looking at it or smelling it. Freeze or toss refrigerated leftovers within 3 to 4 days, even if they smell and look fine. Not sure how old it is? Remember, when in doubt, throw it out. Freezing food kills harmful bacteria that can cause food poisoning. Well, bacteria can even survive freezing temperatures. When food is thawed, bacteria can still be present and it can then begin to multiply. So cooking food to the proper internal temperature is the best way to kill harmful bacteria. This one I get more times than I can count. And people feel very strongly on both sides of this argument. Putting chicken in a colander and rinsing it with water will remove bacteria like salmonella. Rinsing chicken in general will not remove bacteria, but in fact will spread those raw juices around your sink, countertops, and onto ready-to-eat foods. So you're just making it worse. Chicken does not need to be washed or rinsed, okay? And if you do, you're going to really end up making it worse. There's no way to wash it, whether you use a colander or not, without getting that bacteria in the sink and the countertop. Bacteria in raw meat can only be killed when it's cooked to a safe minimum internal temperature, which for poultry is 165 degrees Fahrenheit. You always, again, want to use a food thermometer to check the internal temperature of that food. Raw cookie dough or a cake batter. I know a lot of people like that, but just a lick can make you sick. Heat is required to kill the germs in those raw ingredients, and that's a really good idea. Once a hamburger is brown in the middle, it's cooked to a safe internal temperature. Well, again, you cannot use visual clues to determine whether the food has been cooked to a safe internal temp. The only way to know is to use that food thermometer. Ground meat, just as an FYI, should be cooked to an internal temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit. If I microwave food, the microwave kills the bacteria, so the food is safe. It's the heat, actually, that's generated by the microwave that kills the bacteria. And again, as we've discussed several times now, microwaves cook from the inside out, which can leave cold spots in food if you're not rotating it and you're not stirring it. So food should always be rotated and stirred during the cooking process to evenly distribute that heat. And then again, after you feel like you've cooked it appropriately, use the food thermometer to give it the final okay. All right. So, yep, as usual, there's an app for that. This one is called FoodKeeper. It's free. Again, I want you to check this out. It's really cool. So the FoodKeeper can help consumers use food while at peak quality and reduce waste. The storage times listed are intended as useful guidelines and are not hard and fast rules. Some foods may deteriorate more quickly, while others may last longer than the time suggested. So again, there is a little common sense and a little thinking involved here, but this is a great supportive app. The times will vary depending on growing conditions, harvesting techniques, manufacturing processes, transportation, distribution conditions, nature of the food, and the storage temps. Remember to buy foods in reasonable quantities and rotate the products in your pantry, refrigerator, and freezer. FIFO, first in, first out. And that's why it's important that, especially in the freezer, when you put something in there, labeling and dating it, just a little bit of tape and a marker. It helps you kind of keep check on what you're putting in there and how long it's staying in there for, okay? Lastly, help is on the way. So if you have a question about food safety, you can call this 800 number. This is the USDA's Meat and Poultry Hotline. There are also food safety messages on various topics 24 hours a day, and you can also email or chat via something called Ask Karen. So I wanted you all to have this information. It's not just like at Thanksgiving where they do the turkey hotline and how to cook that. This is year-round, and it gives you a lot of tips for any food. So that being said, these are the resources that I got this information from, and I don't know if there are any questions. I'm happy to answer those. We do have a few minutes left. If not, the one thing I do want to ask of all of you, in addition to saying thank you for participating and being in group today, is I'm always looking for new subject matter. So if there are other things that you all would like to see discussed and have a presentation on, please put that in at the end here with the survey and include it. I do look at that, and I am very interested to know what else is on your mind and what you'd be interested in learning about, okay? So with that, I see there's one question or comment. Again, I want to thank you all so much. Quick question on my thermometer from Thermometer. Oh, cool. Okay, well, let's do a little promotion on that. Thermopop from ThermWorks. I'm going to have to Google that. I'm not familiar, Stacy, but thank you again for putting that resource out there. I'll definitely look into it. Cool. You're very welcome. Again, I want to thank you all. I hope you have a great day. And please, I'm going to hang on for the survey. And again, I welcome and value your comments. Everybody, have a great week. please stay safe. I know we're potentially looking at some crazy weather, so have a great day and thank you again.